The church is one foundation, is Jesus Christ our Lord. She is his new creation, the water and the wood. From him he came and taught us, turning his holy bride. It is our God he brought us, and for her life he died. Elect from every nation, yet born of the earth, the chosen of salvation, one Lord, one faith, one birth. One holy name she blesses, for grace one holy birth, and to one hope she dresses, with every grace endued. The feast of the cathedra, the seat, the see of Peter, may well be pre-Christian in its instinct, insofar as the Lares, the gods of the family, the spirits of the ancestors would have been honoured around this time in midwinter, and people would have been aware of the importance of their origins. The church too looks to its origin, and Peter is the rock. He was initially at Antioch as carrying that supreme authority, the Petrine authority, the fullness of the priesthood, the point of reference. And then, of course, when he reached Rome, with him came the impetus. That Petrine rock settled, as it were, in the heart of the known world, and from there faith and light and unity was able to radiate with its healing wings throughout the Mediterranean basin. And because of the link between, of course, what became the West and the East, the Western Empire and the Eastern Empire, that too then would have its effect way up there in New Rome, Constantinople. Polis is city, and Constantine, of course, would have been an early emperor able to unite in himself great power. And the way in which these central points were to be the central points also of unity and building blocks in the physicity of the church is to be borne in mind as we look at the structure of the church, actually willed by providence itself and wisdom from on high. Therefore Jerusalem, where James was bishop, was the starting point, and it is still important. We must not forget Jerusalem, and there, of course, in his successor's hands happens the early miracle of the light. Then, of course, Antioch, of course, still there, but now very much in an Eastern Asian and Oriental atmosphere, is nevertheless important, and there are Antiochian Christians still carrying on the ancient tradition. Then Rome, and the link between Rome and Alexandria is important, for St. Mark was a disciple and an interpreter of St. Peter. He was young, and he then carried on this power, this witness, this chain down to Alexandria, which of course was important and is still important historically. There it was a diffusion of very specific monastic life which influenced the whole Christian world, but also it was a place where things were thrashed out theologically. And that too is to be borne in mind, for the East was more developed initially in its philosophical and theological analysis of problems. It was something that St. Hilary of Poitiers realized very quickly when he had to be involved with the East as a legate. He realized the debates were far more profound and evolved and developed there in the East than at the time in the West. They had their own language, which of course had to be translated into equivalent terms, which of course caused problems. But anyway, the eventual importance of Constantinople is something which is to be borne in mind, for Rome fell 547, but of course it carried on in the East until 1453, and there are still vestiges of the East in several levels of the Eastern Church, her life and observance. For instance, the way that the bishop is vested and honoured is something that comes from the Byzantine court. And even to this day, the Eastern, the Byzantine time, specifically that of the Byzantine Empire, is still observed on that ethos, where it starts with the night, that is, they count the hours from nightfall. And therefore, we see what has actually happened, for Rome, having fallen much earlier, left a certain continuity of power in the East. Now, there was never any question whatsoever of there being two churches. That was unthinkable. These patriarchates, and of course Constantinople would be important because it was New Rome, were there, but always with that element of primacy of honour shown towards the figure of Peter, and that was always there in the East. But the patriarchs, of course, they had their own very central and powerful authority locally. Autocephalus in Greek means a head of that's a church with its own head, kephalos, and so they had their life, which explains how also they could evolve with their own discipline. And by the way, they did not have that element of refusal of local languages, they only had a few. Very quickly in the Western Patriarchate, Rome, it became crystallized in the language of the Mediterranean basin, which they were using the Latin with bits of Greek thrown in and also bits of Hebrew. But in the East they took on the languages of the area, but then they remained at that point. Hence the Greek of the church today is slightly more antiquated than Greek, modern Greek, although they actually do understand it and the pronunciation is the same. Now, also with regard to the way they took on certain customs and a way of expressing life, that is a part of enculturation, and the church being so huge, it is inevitable that it should be such. And therefore, we respect this huge wealth of spirituality, culture, discipline, observance, and life, which the Spirit himself has inspired in all these bits of the wider Christian family. It's all under grace, and the Lord is working fully in these sacraments, for they are the same. And of course, the tragedy is that these elements of culture caused eventual tension, and then it became something which was linked with political issues and also, unfortunately, doctrinal issues, because bit by bit in the West came in the filioque, that clause which they never accepted in the East, for it was not there in the original Nicene and Constantinopolitan definition of the faith, which we still use in the Creed. The clause they thought was an intrusion and an invasion of something which had been agreed by all the bishops of the world. Of course, it can be understood, and theologians have actually thrashed it out, and even in the Council of Florence in 1439 it was settled theologically and doctrinally, but it was not accepted in the East, and so again they were split, and they are still split until this very period in which we're living, even though John Paul II was hoping that there would be a healing by the year 2000, on some levels at least. He wanted the church to breathe again with its two lungs. But anyway, essentially, since 1054 they are apart. Now, there is something to be borne in mind. They are, in the Lord's mind, still very much our brethren, and he's very much at work in their life. He's protecting them, and in the terrible time of the last century, where under communist persecution, great chunks of their family was lost to martyrdom and persecution, they could not preach, they could not teach, they could not transmit in writing, they could only pray, and only under difficult circumstances. And that prayer kept them going. Why? Because the doctrine, the theology, the teaching, the learning, the tradition was all contained in the words of liturgy, very rich and very full. Therefore, they were doctrinally on paper and in the oral tradition keeping what was there, because the state could not actually touch the liturgy itself. That was carrying on, and therefore the faith was carrying on. Lex orandi, the law of praying. And when we actually do change words in the liturgy, we are doing something quite dangerous. We can do it because the church has authority to do it, but when it came, for instance, in the 40 years following the council, we actually had a poor translation in the English-speaking world of the Eucharistic prayer, for instance, tampering with the actual Latin and leaving out bits. It was a problem, even a theological problem. So, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, Pope Benedict XVI, and already before then, there was an impetus to get things re-established. And now it is more close to the prayer of the whole Church, so that we're actually using the same prayers here as we would be in any other Catholic church throughout the world. It is important. There can't be such a diversity amongst the nations that it's no longer the same language. Now, it is important to bear in mind that there are also indications of the Lord's positive will. Firstly, there has been in recent times, already since the 80s or so, a series of events going on in a bridge country, Syria, now of course in trouble, in Damascus itself, one of the most ancient cities of the world, and linked with Paul, of course, St. Paul's conversion. There have been these strange events going on linked with Myrna. She is by now a lady about our generation, but she was a young married woman, about 18 at the time when things started, and these icons were oozing out, bleeding if you like, oil, and this oil was performing big miracles. And then she was starting to have mystical experiences. But what was coming through was this: the Lord was using this hidden channel to indicate his will with regard to the church. And the Vatican actually sat up and was sending people to investigate, and were taking it very seriously, because it was quite clear that the Lord was doing something for our time, indicating where he wanted true ecumenism to start. And it was becoming very strong in the years when, about once every 5 years or so, the two Easters coincided, East and West. I believe actually she would be under the Pope as regards jurisdiction, but that she would be of the Eastern Rite. I think that's who it is, and therefore she'd be an interesting person. But there are other points also in the Christian world where similar things have happened. One would be Cairo, Keitun, where Our Lady was appearing way back in the 70s or so, and on precisely an Eastern church, on the dome of an Eastern Orthodox church, there, Coptic I presume, down there in Egypt. Copt just comes from the same word as Egypt, and of course a very ancient Christianity. And there it was in an area where there was also a strong Muslim presence, and the Muslims also, anyone who came, because they do have a certain devotion to Our Blessed Lady under their own modality, they were seeing the same thing, and anyone else who came to see what was going on saw exactly the same thing. Therefore it was a public one, and it went on for a long time and was able to be filmed. Our Lady appearing over the dome of this church. Initially when people saw it, they thought it was a person going to commit suicide, and they were saying, don't jump, don't jump. And of course they realized bit by bit what was going on. It was an apparition. But why should it happen there? Question mark. Which is answered again by what was starting around about the same time, or actually slightly later, 1981, in Medjugorje. Why there? Again, a place of linking many cultures and religions. And actually, apparently Our Lady answered why she was appearing there one time. It was because she found there much faith. Of course, they were under duress with the communist persecution. But it was a place where there were Muslims around, Eastern Orthodox around, the old Yugoslavia, and Roman Catholic. That area there, Bosnia-Herzegovina, would have been Catholic, and she was appearing there. But she did actually mention right at the beginning, when it came to what she was asking of these people, that she was looking for fasting, and that was quite demanding, Wednesdays and Fridays, bread and water. But she did actually put this bit in, apparently, that the discipline of fasting has all but disappeared in the West, the Western Church. And she was indicating by that, of course, as Queen of Heaven, she could see how the East had maintained certain things. They would never, for instance, eat anything before Holy Communion. They would celebrate more rarely, they receive Holy Communion more rarely, but they're always fasting. And also, if one goes to Romania now and talks to, for instance, a Catholic who had been Orthodox, who has become Catholic out there in Romania, they will tell you that the Orthodox out there are quite scandalized by the fact that Catholics who perhaps have left the Orthodox community to become Catholics are becoming flexible with regard to what they had always practiced before when they were Orthodox fasting, because in Lent, right through Lent, of course they would fast very seriously, and they look at Catholics and they see how somehow they're somewhat laid back quite often, and so they ask these questions. Are you less demanding on these things? So just to be aware of these things, that we have to respect the larger Christian family, because these also are taking seriously what they received from the past and don't think they can get through immediate shortcut to something as though they knew better than 2 millennia. So that's where we're coming from, and we must remember that in this wider context. But it is actually something that the young people there at Medjugorje were puzzled about with regard to what was the true church. And apparently they did ask Our Blessed Lady about this years ago, and there was one answer which Our Lady, I think, gave. It was something like this. She was indicating, of course, the way in which the Lord from heaven guides his children like a great king. And his vision would be that of souls, therefore, and it would be something personal and regal. He's leading them to glory there where they are. But she did actually apparently say this. But the fact that all the apparitions of me happen in the Catholic Church should make you ask why. That's a discreet way of saying, therefore, that the will of heaven was such that grace overflows, but nevertheless there is a fullness there in which God is more free to act. And that is still the case. I just happen to have this with me now, which a friend sent to me. On the back of it, it's here written, the 6th of September, Thursday, during apparition. Therefore, there was an apparition going on at this time when she took this snap, taken from apparition site on Podboro, Medjugorje. And it goes on to my good friend and Padre, and the little smiley there, Father David. All the time of taking this, I saw nothing. This figure of light is in fact 4 feet from the ground. I was trying to get a nice picture of the village! Exclamation mark. So that's the kind of thing that's still going on there, and Our Lady, from where she reigns, is indicating that she is wanting the same vision as they have in heaven, that this notion of being satisfied with our divisions is an offence. And this also came through in the series of events which is not yet concluded in Damascus there with Myrna, that the Lord actually found this complacency that we have here on earth, and settling for all these divisions and sometimes getting entrenched in them, not realizing the problem that is for him, is an offence to heaven, and that his first desire would be that the east and west should breathe again with its 2 lungs. Just to conclude, the Lord has given us a great gift in the present Holy Father which we have. He is someone able to attract souls by his goodness, his authenticity, his humility, like St. Francis, of whom he has taken the name, of whom it has been said he was the man closest to Christ, or to Christ's heart. But also he is someone who, as a Jesuit, knows things, and it's not indifferent either that when he was there, Archbishop in Argentina, he was the ordinary for the Eastern Rite Catholics. Therefore, he's aware of the importance of this. And our first dialogue is one that happens in prayer. It is one that happens on the mystical level. For if we are truly engaging with him, bathed in that real presence, that angelic presence also which surrounds it, we meet all those who are doing the same thing. And we will meet more easily those who are doing it with great intensity than those who are actually perhaps doing certain things which we're doing, but are actually doing it in a human mode. Therefore, this is the true ecumenical contact, that of the soul, that of treating genuinely what is greater than us, and realizing that only God can do it. But he can do it when we genuinely give him the space, which is that of engaging. Worship involves engaging. That means letting God be God. and facing what is unutterably great, giving him the space. And in that we have all to learn from the centuries of the East and the West in their undivided tradition. But even in the East, they cannot ever be happy without the figure of Peter. He was always there in the early councils, either by delegation. The last word often was given to Rome because they knew by instinct that the security of the promise was with Rome. Therefore there has to be a healing that these patriarchates again will breathe with their one true life. Adios, 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 isquiros, adios, atanatos, eleisonimas. Adios, 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 isquiros, adios, atanatos, eleisonimas. Adios, 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 isquiros, adios, atanatos. Gratias agamus ad Domino Deo nostrum, dignum et justum est. It is truly right and just, our duty and our salvation, always and everywhere to give you thanks, Lord, Holy Father, Almighty and eternal God, for you, eternal Shepherd, who do not desert your flock, but through the blessed apostles, watch over it and protect it always, so that it may be governed by those you have appointed shepherds, to lead it in the name of your Son. And so with angels and archangels, with thrones and dominions, and with all the hosts and powers of hell, we sing the hymn of your glory, as without end we acclaim. Holy, holy, holy Lord, God of hosts, heaven and earth are full of your glory. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Lamb of God, you take away the sins of the world. Have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sins of the world. Have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sins of the world. Grant us peace. Been torn and tribulation, and tumult of her woe, she waits the consummation of peace forevermore. Till with the vision glorious, her longing eyes are blessed, and the great church victorious shall be the church at